Salve! Hi. In this lesson we're going to be looking at George Adler's textbook, and it's going to be Pensum Alterum, the second lesson, lesson 2 on page 7 of George Adler's A Practical Grammar of the Latin Language for Speaking and Writing Latin and Reading. You can find it on Google Books. Just look for George Adler, A Practical Grammar of the Latin Language, and you can download the text, and you can also find reprint editions of this text available for sale. The first declension. This is a type of organizing of a noun in Latin, and the first declension in Latin comprises all substantives, that's nouns that refer to things or things that can be thought of, all substantives, and also adjectives, nouns adjective, which form their possessive case in I, that's A-E, I. That's a diphthong, it's two letters joined together to make one sound, I. In later Latin, that simply became e. But in the time period that we're talking about, which is the time of the late Republic and earlier, it was pronounced I. Caesar. Not Caesar. 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 The ordinary form of the word is called the nominative, that's its name. And those that are purely Roman end in a, that's the letter A. A, E, I, U are the 5 vowels as they are pronounced in Latin. A, E, I, O, U. That's A, E, I, O, U in English. Latin needs to be pronounced oro rotundo, with a rounded mouth, as Cicero said. So A, E, I, O, U. And these are the words that end in A, the first declension. And then there are a few Greek words that have different endings, e and es and as. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, those that end in a and e are feminine. They are girly words, feminine words. And the others are, generally speaking, masculine, but there are plenty of exceptions to this. So here we're going to look at the declension of the word carta, which means paper. Carta. You probably have heard of the Magna Carta, the big paper, the first document that outlined the English legal system, the fundamental document of the English legal system, the Magna Carta, the great paper. So, my paper, mea carta, mea carta. Of my paper, or my papers, meai cartai, meai cartai. And we can see that the words are changing their form. Now this is the bit that's really hard for English speakers to process. And we can learn the declension and we can memorize it and we can learn the ends and songs and all that kind of stuff. But to actually get the processing going on in here requires the formation of a whole lot of new nerve connections. And that will take some time and lots of practice with examples. So, meai cartai, of my paper. The giving case, to my paper or for my paper, meai cartai, meai cartai. The accusative case, meam cartam, meam cartam. And something called the vocative case, when you're talking to it, although you don't, unless you're completely insane, going around You don't go around talking to pieces of paper. But if you were to have a fancy to talk to a piece of paper, then you would say, mea carta, my paper. And the ablative case, that's with the paper, or about the paper, or by the paper. So by or with my paper. Listen carefully. Mea carta. Mea carta. Remember before, pro vuestro captu, which we had in the first lesson. That's also ablative. So, mea carta, with or by my paper. Let's look at the example of mesa. Now, Latin vowels before the letters ns are long. So it's mesa, mesa. Not mensa, but mesa. And it's slightly nasalized, but not very much. So, tua mensa, your table, that's the nominative. Tua mensa, your table, when you're talking about the table. And the table is the subject, or the theme of the sentence. Tua mensa, your table is beautiful. So the table is the subject of the sentence. Tua mensa. Your tables, or of your table, the possessive case, also called the genitive case. Tuai mensai, your tables. To your table, or for your table, for the purpose of your table. Tuai mensai. And the accusative, your table. Tuam mensam. Tuam mensam. The vocative, calling it out. Tua mensa. And the ablative, that's with or from, by your table. Tua mensa. The of the ablative of the first declension is always long. Tua mensa. In some Renaissance texts, it's identified with a circumflex accent over the A. And you'll come across that if you're reading older texts on Google Books. And in some modern texts, it's marked with a macron. That's a long line over the vowel, showing that the vowel is to be pronounced long. The macron over the vowel. And we'll get into this problem with macrons later on, because macrons can be used for two different purposes. They can be used to show that the vowel is long, or they can be used to show that the syllable is long. And we'll have to learn what that means later on, what a long syllable is, and what a syllable that's long by nature, a syllable that has a long vowel, is. Now we're going to get into the first bit of the lesson. And what the method does is it asks a question and then it elicits an answer that's very closely tied to the question itself. So the first time through, I'm going to give you the question and then you have to actually answer it yourself. So, habesne, do you have? Habesne. And your answer to me is habeo. I have, habeo. Now, although this is spelt H-A-B-E-O, we know from the Roman grammarians themselves that the sound of this E in habeo was closer to an I sound than an E sound. This is an occasion where the sound is influenced by its environment. So it's not habeo, but it's habeo, habeo. And in fact, in some inscriptions, we find that it's misspelled with an I. And in some, even in some Roman texts, it's misspelled with an I, because it's a much more tight sound than a normal E. So, H-A-B-E-O, habeo, habeo. So, habesne, do you have? and you respond to me, habeo. Habeo. So I'm going to ask you now, habes ne? And you would have said, habeo. I have. I could ask you, assuming that you don't have it, num habes? Do you not have? And this is going to assume a negative answer. Num habes? And your answer would be non habeo. I don't have. Non habeo. So, num habes? Non habeo. So far we've had habesne, habeo, and num habes. Do you not have? And the answer, non habeo. I don't have. Now, we can also say it this way. Is there to you? Is there to you is the same thing as saying, do you have? So, est tibi. It is to you. Est ne tibi. Is it to you? In other words, do you have? Tibi is the dative case. So, est ne tibi. Is there to you? Est ne tibi? And the answer is mihi est. To me, it is. Mihi est. In other words, I have. Mihi est. Est ne tibi? Mihi est. Or I can ask, habes ne? Do you have? And you answer, habeo. So there are two ways of formulating this question in Latin. So, if a Roman wanted to say yes, this presents a problem, because Romans didn't have a word for yes. So they would say ita est. It's like that, ita est. They would never say ita by itself. Now you often hear modern speakers of Latin using the word ita as though it were the equivalent of yes, just the word ita by itself. This is incorrect. The correct way of doing it is to say ita est. That's how it is, ita est. In other words, yes. Or the Roman would repeat the verb in the sentence. So, do you run? He wouldn't answer yes, he would say, I run. Is there a pen on the table? And he would answer either he would say a pen, or he'd say there is a pen, or there is. But he wouldn't just say yes, because there was no way of doing that. He could say no, of course, quite easily, just by saying non. No, there isn't. But yes presented a slight problem, or it does for us, because we have one word for it. So we have to get our heads around this idea that we don't respond to yes-no questions with yes, but with a phrase such as ita est, it is that way, or we repeat the verb. So, habesne pilium. Do you have the hat that does not have a brim? Now, we could just use the word for a modern hat or a cap as well. So, habesne pilium. Pilium. Do you have a hat? Now, habesne takes the accusative case. It governs, it rules over the accusative, we say in Latin. And so, pilium is in the accusative. Pilius, nominative, it's when it's the subject of a sentence. Nominative, pilius. But habesne pilium. Habesne pilium. And your answer was going to be pilium habeo. Pilium habeo. A hat I have. Habeo I have. So, habesne pilium. And you would answer pilium habeo. Or you could say sic est amice. Yes, friend. Sic est amice. Habeo pilium. I have a hat. Habeo pilium. Or you can use the nominative with est. Because est the verb esse, to be, in this case, doesn't have the accusative, but it has the nominative. So, est mihi, it is to me, pilius, a hat. Est mihi pilius, it is to me a hat. In other words, I have a hat. Est mihi pilius. So, estne tibi, is it to you, pilius, a hat? Do you have a hat? Estne tibi pilius? And you would answer, est mihi, it is to me, pilius, a hat. Est mihi pilius, I have a hat. So, estne tibi pilius? Estne tibi pilius? And your answer would have been, est mihi pilius. Now a few words and bits and pieces. The Romans didn't have a modern pen. They had calamus, or kulamus, as it was known in Greek, which was a pen which was made out of a reed. Towards the end of the Roman Empire, we do find in Isidore of Seville the word penna, which is a feather, being used to indicate a writing implement. Our word pen, of course, comes from that because feathers, the quill of the feather, was used to make the pen with. So we still use the word penna nowadays. It's a late Latin word. Penna, that's the nominative, and it's feminine. So we say haec penna, this pen. Haec is the feminine for this. So haec penna, this pen. And we say huius pennae, this pens, or of this pen. Huius pennae. Huius is this, of this, and pennae, of pen, or pen apostrophe s, pens. So huius pennae, of this pen, and haec penna. Haec penna. Haec and hic and hoc are peculiar in Latin because they are spelt with one C at the end of the word, but the Roman grammarians are quite clear that they are pronounced with a double C, particularly before a vowel. So hic, haec, hoc, meaning this. Hic, haec, hoc. And in one particular Shakespeare play, I can't remember which one, there's a joke about hic, haec, hoc. You can look it up on Google. But it was pretty much a synonym for Latin. So if you made jokes about someone hicking and hiking and hocking, well, that meant that they were learning their Latin. Tainia is a ribbon. Tainia, not such a common word. Tainia, tainiae. So haec tainia, this ribbon. Huius tainiae, this ribbons, or of this ribbon. Feminine again, ends in an a, first declension. Tainia, tainiae. And we have another word, fascia, fasciae, also meaning a ribbon or something that you tie things together with. Fascia, fasciae. Haec, fascia, huius, fasciae. The table we've seen already. Mensa, haec, mensa, this table, haec, this, haec, mensa, and this table's huius mensae, or of this table, huius mensae. Carta, we've had already, paper. So haec carta, this paper. Huius cartae, this papers, or of this paper in the possessive. A hat, pilius, it's masculine, pilius. And it's huius pilii, of this hat. Huius pilii. The accusative, pilium, pilium. Sugar. The Romans did have sugar, and the word is saccharum, saccharum. It's neuter gender. So hoc saccharum, hoc saccharum. Hic pilius, this this hat. Hicke, this, masculine. Hocke, this, neuter. So hocke saccharum, this sugar. Huiis saccari, this sugars or of this sugar. Huiis saccari. Sal is either found in the masculine or it's found in the neuter. So it's either hicke sal, huiis salis, or it's hocke sal, huiis salis, whichever you choose. Except that in the masculine, the accusative would be salem, and for the neuter, the accusative is the same as the nominative. So it's sal, hocke sal, and the accusative is also going to be sal. It won't change. But the accusative of the masculine does change because it's salem, salem. And we'll be learning about why this happens later on. But if you remember for now that the accusative of neuters is the same as the nominative. That'll do you for now. Sal and sal in the accusative. So words of neuter gender have the nominative and the accusative and the vocative, both in the singular and the plural, the same. Let's have a look at two words we've seen already, the word for my and for your. So meus, my, and in the accusative meum, that's masculine. For feminine words, because the word my has to agree with the word that it's my whatever it is, mea, and the accusative meam, mea, meam. But the neuter is the same for both meum and meum. Your, the masculine, nominative tuus, tuus, and the accusative tuum, tuum. The feminine tua and the accusative tuam, tua, tuam. And the neuter the same for both tuum and tuum. Adjectives, those are words that describe a substantive or a noun. And adjective pronouns, they must agree with the nouns they go with in gender, and they must agree in number, that's singular or plural, and they must agree also in the case. So we can't mix and match, these have to have agreement. So we have to say meum saccharum, my sugar. We can't say mea saccharum, that would be wrong. We can't say meus saccharum. No, it has to be meum saccharum. That's either nominative or accusative, because it's the same for both in the neuter. Meum saccharum. How about the word for hat, which is masculine? So pilius meus. Pilius meus. We can't say pilius mea, that would be wrong, because pilius is masculine. So pilius meus. And pilium meum, because pilium also exists as a neuter form. So accusative, pilium meum, or meum pilium. My pen, mea penna. We can't say meus penna. That would be wrong because it's feminine. Mea penna. And in the accusative, meam pennam or pennam meam. We can't say pennam meum. That would be wrong. So it's pennam meam. Your salt, nominative, sal tuum, or if it was the other form, masculine, we'd say sal tuus, sal tuus. And the accusative sal tuum or tuum sal, whichever, makes no difference. A little bit more of the sentence building, and that'll bring us to the end of this first lesson. Habesne meum pilium. Do you have my hat? Habesne meum pilium. Now meum, of course, has to go with pilium. Habesne meum pilium in gender, meum, number, singular, and case, accusative. So habesne meum pilium. Singular, accusative, masculine. So habesne meum pilium. Vero pilium tuum, your hat. Habeo, I have. So I'm going to ask you now, habesne meum pilium, do you have my hat? And the answer, pilium tuum, your hat. Pilium tuum, habeo, I have. Pilium tuum, habeo. Notice that the verb is at the end. Pilium tuum, habeo. And the thing that's most important is at the beginning. So, habesne meum pilium. Do you have my hat? If I was emphasizing whether you've got the hat as opposed to something else. So the answer is pilium tuum habeo. If I was to ask you, habesne meum pilium, have you got my hat as opposed to someone else's hat, then you might want to answer back and put the word for my at the beginning and say, tuum pilium habeo, your hat, I have. So Latin can move the words around to give the emphasis. The beginning of the sentence, the first word's the most important, the second is the next most important, and then at the end of the sentence, the last word's the most important, and going backwards, of course. So things can be moved around in Latin at will, and the meaning can subtly change in a way that's very, very difficult to translate into English. Because as we said, English is linear, you are restricted to the word order, but Latin can move the words around to give very subtle variations in emphasis and meaning. Habesne tiniam meam. Have you got my ribbon? Now tinia is feminine, so tiniam, accusative case. Habesne tiniam, and it's meam, because it's feminine, not tiniam meum, that would be wrong. It's tiniam meam. And the answer, habeo, I have, habeo, tuam tiniam, I have your ribbon. Habeo tuam tiniam. Estne tibi, is it to you? Penna, a pen. Do you have a pen? Estne tibi penna. And the answer, est, it is, mihi, to me, penna, a pen. So, estne tibi penna. Est mihi penna is the answer. So now I'm going to ask you the question. Estne tibi penna? Est mihi penna. Estne tibi kaharta? Do you have paper? Est mihi kaharta. Estne tibi sal? Do you have salt? Est mihi sal. Estne tibi saccharum? Do you have sugar? Est mihi saccharum. Habesne saccharum? Do you have sugar? Habesne saccharum in the accusative. Saccharum habeo is the answer. Saccharum habeo. Habesne sal? Do you have salt? Habesne sal, that's assuming salt is neuter gender. And the answer, sal habeo. Sal habeo. Or I could ask you, habesne salem, assuming that salt is of the masculine gender. Habesne salem, and the answer, salem habeo. In that case, it changes in the accusative, sal, salem. And that brings us to the end of lesson 1, or lesson 2 actually, of Adler. Adler's first lesson is about pronunciation of Latin according to the German pronunciation of the mid-1800s, which we're going to ignore completely. So that's lesson 1 of Adler out of a total of 96 lessons in his book. Wale, goodbye.